A key turning in a deadbolt sounded different after midnight, sharper, louder, like it wanted witnesses. Paige didn't mind closing shifts, but she hated the moment the last customer left and the supermarket stopped pretending it was a public place. During open hours, the building felt like a machine with 1,000 moving pieces, carts rattling, scanners chirping, freezer fans roaring, children crying somewhere near cereal, the constant shuffling of shoes across tile. After hours, it became one enormous room pretending it was empty, while every cooler and vent and compressor insisted it was still alive. She worked inventory for a regional grocery chain set off a 2-lane road beyond the edge of town. It wasn't rural enough to be called isolated, but it was quiet enough at night that headlights in the lot looked like comets. The store closed at 11 p.m. Sharp, corporate policy, doors locked, alarm set. 2 employees minimum inside until the last task was complete. Tonight that minimum was barely met. One manager had called in sick. One stocker had left early for a family emergency. The remaining crew moved like tired ghosts, dragging pallets, scanning barcodes, checking dates, pulling expired items into grey bins. Paige kept her clipboard tucked under one arm, her handheld scanner in the other, and followed the planogram list like it was scripture. The manager on duty, a lean man named Curtis, handled the front-end paperwork while Paige worked the back aisles. Curtis was competent and impatient, the kind of person who treated rules like weights on his ankles. He wanted to lock up and go home. Paige understood, but the inventory list did not care. At 12:14 a.m., with the overhead lights reduced to the night setting, half dim, half humming, Paige reached the middle of the store and realized she could hear her own breathing. Not because it was loud, because nothing else was moving. The refrigeration units still ran. They always ran, but their sound was steady, predictable, like a background track. What was missing was the irregular noise of other humans, the scrape of a pallet jack, the crinkle of shrink wrap, the distant clatter of a dropped can. Curtis had been at the front registers minutes ago. Paige had heard him flip through papers, the soft slap of a stapler. Now, the store felt paused. She stopped at the end cap display in aisle 9, pasta sauce stacked in perfect red columns, and listened. A faint rolling sound came from somewhere deeper in the store. Paige angled her head, trying to place it. It wasn't mechanical, not a fan cycling, not a compressor starting. It sounded like a cartwheel rotating slowly, one loose bearing clicking every half turn. She waited for it to stop. It didn't. The sound moved across the tile as if something pushed a cart without urgency, letting it drift. Paige didn't see anything between the shelves. The aisle sight lines were long, straight lanes that should have revealed movement instantly, but the rolling remained just out of view, traveling across the store behind shelving hidden by stacked products and end caps. Paige told herself it was Curtis, moving a cart from the front to the office. She told herself it was a stray cart settling on uneven tile. She told herself anything that let her keep scanning. Her scanner beeped quietly as she checked the last row of jars. Then the rolling sound stopped. A new sound replaced it. A single, dry click. The click came from above, ceiling height, like a fluorescent ballast snapping or a security camera pivoting. Paige's gaze lifted automatically to the black domes mounted on the rafters. There were dozens, set to cover every aisle and entrance. The domes looked the same even when they were active. The only clue was subtle, the way a camera's internal lens shifted, a faint movement behind smoked plastic. Paige stared at one dome near aisle 10. It angled. The adjustment was small, but it was purposeful, rotating to face directly down the aisle toward her. Paige didn't move. Her skin prickled and she felt embarrassed by it. Cameras tracked movement. Cameras didn't track people who stood still. Stillness shouldn't be interesting. The dome rotated again, another fraction of a turn, and stopped. Paige lowered her eyes and forced her hands back to the inventory list. If she acted like nothing was wrong, nothing would become wrong. That was how she handled late-night nerves. Deny them oxygen. She moved toward aisle 10. The aisle lighting was dimmer there, one overhead strip partially dead, casting the shelf tops into shadow. Paige stepped into the lane and immediately smelled something faint and sour. Not rotten food, not spoiled dairy. It was more like damp cardboard left too long in a basement, mixed with the sharp edge of industrial cleaner. That smell didn't belong in the dry air of the store's main floor. Paige slowed, scanning boxes of cereal and snack bars. Her shoes squeaked lightly, the sound too bright in the quiet. Halfway down the aisle, she saw a cart. Not a shopping cart. A flatbed restocking cart with a grey plastic bin on top. It sat angled slightly, as if it had rolled to a stop and failed to straighten. Paige didn't remember leaving a cart here. Curtis usually kept equipment pulled to the back to avoid trip hazards. Corporate loved trip hazards. Paige approached cautiously. The cart's bin was empty. The flatbed surface was clean, except for a single item, a sheet of paper folded into quarters, placed dead center like a note. Paige stared at it without touching it. Paper after hours always meant something administrative, an incident report, a schedule note, a warning from management. But this paper wasn't printed. It looked like torn notebook paper, the kind with faint blue lines. Paige reached out and unfolded it. The paper was blank. No writing, no doodle, no smudge. Paige's mouth went dry. Someone had placed it there. Someone had folded it. Someone had set it like it mattered, and it contained nothing. She set the paper back down and backed away from the cart, suddenly sure she was not alone. Paige turned and walked fast toward the front of the store, calling Curtis's name once. Not loud, just enough to make sound and prove she could. Her voice didn't echo the way she expected. The shelves swallowed it. No answer came. Paige rounded the end cap and headed for the front lanes. The store's main aisle, the wide racetrack path around departments, was clear. The registers sat beyond, dark screens and closed lanes. The customer service desk was a dull island under dim light. Curtis should have been near the office door behind customer service. He wasn't. Paige approached the office window. The glass was tinted and usually showed the glow of a computer monitor inside. Tonight it was dark. The office light was off. No movement. Paige tried the office handle. Locked. That made no sense. Curtis had a key. Curtis wouldn't lock the office from inside while still on the floor. Paige's pulse climbed. She stepped toward the front doors. The sliding entrance was shut, and the metal security gate was pulled halfway down. The closed sign hung in the glass. Beyond it, the parking lot sat empty under sodium lamps. She checked the alarm panel near the door. The display showed the store still in closing process, not armed yet. That meant Curtis hadn't set it. Paige moved behind the customer service desk and looked for the store phone. It sat in its cradle, dark screen, blinking red message light. She lifted the receiver. Dead tone, not silence. Dead tone, the hard, flat sound of a line not connected. Paige set it down slowly. The refrigeration hum filled the space again, steady and relentless. Then, from the back of the store, a new sound cut through. The long squeal of metal rolling over metal. The receiving bay door. Paige's shoulders tightened. The receiving bay was at the far rear near the stockroom, where trucks delivered pallets during the day. That door was heavy and loud. It didn't move quietly. It didn't drift. It opened with intent. Paige stood still behind customer service, listening. The squeal continued, then stopped with a dull thud that reverberated through the building. A few seconds passed. Then the rolling cartwheel sound returned, closer now, in the direction of aisle 7, moving toward the front. Paige's mind jumped through options. Hide in the office? Office was locked. Run out the front? Gate was down and the doors were secured. Go behind the registers? There was a back hallway that led to emergency exits, but those doors were alarmed. Opening one would set off sirens and summon police. But police response out here could take time, and she didn't want to be trapped outside with someone who knew the lot better than she did. Paige grabbed the nearest thing that felt like a tool, a metal stapler from the service desk. The weight was ridiculous, but it helped her hands stop shaking. The cartwheel click moved into the main racetrack aisle. Paige leaned slightly to see down the lane between customer service and the first register. A flatbed cart rolled into view. It moved slowly, as if pushed from behind by someone keeping low. The bin on top was empty. The cart's handle faced forward. No person was visible. The cart rolled another few feet and stopped directly in front of customer service, centered as if parked carefully. Paige didn't move. The air smelled faintly sour again, stronger now, as if the cart carried it. On the cart bed lay the same folded paper she'd seen in aisle 10. Paige's heart hammered. Her mind resisted. The paper couldn't have moved. She had left it on the cart in aisle 10, unless there were two identical carts, unless someone had copied it. The cart shifted slightly, rolling an inch closer. Paige backed away. The cart stopped. The stapler in Paige's hand felt too small again. She looked around the front area for another employee. Any sign of Curtis? The store remained empty. Paige stepped sideways, trying to angle toward the hallway behind the registers without crossing directly in front of the cart. Her shoes squeaked. The sound was tiny, but seemed to draw attention. The cart rolled again. Not toward her this time, toward the register lanes. It turned at a shallow angle, wheels clicking, and headed for lane 3, the one closest to the office door. It stopped at the end of the belt. The conveyor belt was off. The scanner was dark. Then the register monitor flickered on. A pale screen glow lit the lane in weak light. The rest of the front remained dim. The monitor displayed no login screen, no menu, just a blank field, like an empty form waiting for input. The receipt printer under the register whirred. A strip of paper fed out. Paige took a step back, breath tight. The printer continued, spitting paper in short bursts, as if typing. The strip dangled, curled, then dropped to the floor. Paige couldn't stop herself from looking. The printed line was short, blocky and wrong in its simplicity. Aisle 12. Paige stared. There was no aisle 12. The store had 11 numbered aisles. The layout was burned into her brain from months of inventory runs. Aisles 1 through 5 were dry goods. 6 through 8 were snacks, baking, breakfast. 9 through 11 were household, pet, seasonal. There was no 12. The number didn't exist on the hanging aisle markers. The printer whirred again. Another strip printed. Aisle 12, then a third. Aisle 12. The repetition wasn't a glitch. The pauses between prints were too deliberate, like someone hitting a key 3 times to emphasize a point. Paige felt a cold line crawl up her spine. She forced herself to move. She had to find Curtis. She had to reach an employee-only phone line in the back, maybe the receiving office, maybe the manager's room. She left the front lanes and walked briskly down the main racetrack toward the back. Her footsteps echoed faintly between shelves. The store's lighting grew dimmer as she went, the night setting leaving pockets of shadow near end caps and signage. She passed aisle 11, then turned the corner where the seasonal section led toward the stockroom doors. The double doors to receiving were open. They weren't wide open. One door was ajar, leaving a dark wedge into the back. The other door was shut. Paige's mouth went dry. Those doors were usually propped open only during deliveries, and never after hours unless someone moved pallets. She approached slowly. The smell of damp cardboard poured out of the wedge, heavy and wrong, like the building's clean air was being replaced by something stored for too long. Paige stopped at the threshold and listened. A faint sound came from deep inside receiving, the rolling click of a cartwheel, slow and regular, as if something pushed a cart in circles. Paige stepped through the doors into the back. Receiving was lit by a single overhead row, half the bulbs dead. Pallets sat stacked along the wall. A forklift rested in its charging corner. The metal roll-up dock door stood open a foot, letting in a stripe of night air. The gap should have been impossible without someone releasing the chain lock. Paige walked toward the manager's desk in receiving. Curtis sometimes used it for paperwork when the front felt too exposed. The desk chair was empty. A clipboard lay on the desk, with a pen beside it. The pen cap was off, ink tip drying. Then Paige saw the time clock terminal mounted near the employee entrance. Its screen was on. The terminal displayed a message, bright against the dark back wall. Clock out, complete. Paige stared. Complete for who? She hadn't clocked out. Curtis hadn't. A second message replaced it, the screen refreshing with a soft beep. Aisle 12 ready. Paige's breath stopped. There was a narrow passage on the far side of receiving that led to overflow shelving. It wasn't an aisle customers saw. It wasn't numbered. It was a service corridor lined with tall racks of product, seasonal overflow, and damaged return pallets. Paige had never seen a sign there, never seen a hanging marker. But as she turned her flashlight on her phone and aimed it down the passage, she saw something new. A laminated aisle marker hanging from the ceiling grid at the corridor's entrance. White rectangle, black letters. 12. Paige stood frozen, phone light trembling in her hand. The marker looked freshly printed. The corners were crisp. It swayed slightly as if it had been hung moments ago. The cartwheel click sounded again, deeper in the corridor. Paige took one step back, then another, every instinct begging her to retreat to the front, to find an exit, to set off an alarm, to do anything but go where the store insisted. Behind her, the roll-up dock door gap widened another inch with a slow metallic groan, as if the building's rear mouth was opening to let something in. And the aisle marker labeled 12 swayed again, patient and inviting. Paige stood at the edge of the corridor, phone light shaking in her hand, staring at the laminated 12 like it was an accusation. The marker swayed gently. There was no breeze in receiving. The air back here was dense and still, held in place by stacks of shrink-wrapped pallets and the sealed geometry of the stockroom. That sway came from something else, something that wanted movement to be visible. The cartwheel click sounded again, deeper down the corridor, slow and regular. Not fast enough to be someone running, not clumsy enough to be an accident. It was the sound of a cart being guided. Paige backed away from the corridor entrance and turned toward the receiving desk. She needed options. She needed a phone line that worked. She needed to find Curtis, because a second person meant reality had witnesses. Her shoes squeaked on the concrete. The noise felt too loud. The overhead lights flickered once, dimming to a sickly tone, then steadied again. Paige moved toward the employee entrance door, the one that led into the staff hallway, and beyond that, the break room and manager office. That door should have been accessible. It was always accessible from inside. She grabbed the push bar and leaned into it. The door didn't budge. It wasn't locked in the normal way. A locked door had a little give, the gentle resistance of a latch refusing. This door felt fused, as if the frame and the slab had become one piece of metal. Paige pressed harder, shoulder against it, palms sweating on the bar. Nothing. Her pulse climbed. She stepped back, breathing too fast, and forced herself to look for another route. Receiving had two exits, the employee door and the dock door, plus the double doors back to the store floor. The dock door gap had widened again. It was open a few inches now, enough to let in a thin draft that carried outdoor cold and the faint smell of asphalt. The dock door chain was supposed to prevent even that. It should have been impossible without a key. Paige approached it carefully. The metal roll-up door shivered softly, as if it vibrated with effort. Beyond the gap was darkness, the dock bay outside unlit, except for the distant spill of parking lot lamps. Paige crouched and tried to see out. The outside looked empty. Then she noticed a shape at ground level near the dock, something long and pale that caught the parking lot glow. It looked like a length of receipt paper, or packing tape, or a strip of plastic banding. It lay across the ground like a marker line. Paige's breath hitched. The strip wasn't blowing in the breeze. It was laid flat, deliberate. The cartwheel click sounded again, now closer, in the corridor labeled 12. Paige stood and backed away from the dock door. She returned toward the double doors that led back onto the store floor, ready to sprint for the front, to pound on the office door, to do anything except remain in receiving where the exits felt wrong. She pushed through the double doors. The store floor was dimmer than before. The night lights had dropped another notch, leaving the aisles in a grey wash. The front registers were distant, barely visible. Paige headed down the racetrack aisle and stopped short. A row of carts stood lined up across the main path, handle to handle, blocking the route to the front. Not a chaotic pile, not abandoned, a deliberate barrier, placed at even intervals like a fence. Paige stared, disbelief tightening her throat. Those carts had been nested near the entrance earlier. Nobody would have the time or reason to drag them here. She approached the cart line cautiously, looking for a gap. Each cart was angled just enough to overlap, leaving no clean path through. Paige glanced left and right. To her left was aisle 11. To her right was seasonal. Both routes would bypass the carts and eventually reconnect near the front. She chose aisle 11 because it was brighter and more familiar. She stepped into aisle 11 and moved quickly, scanning ahead. The aisle was long and straight, shelves stacked with detergent, paper towels, and pet food. A hanging sign marked it clearly, 11. Halfway down, Paige slowed. At the far end of the aisle, near the end cap, a new sign hung from the ceiling grid. 12. Paige stopped, pulse banging. That sign had not been there. The store's aisle markers were uniform, large black numbers on white placards. But this one looked newer, sharper, laminated in a way the others weren't. She turned and looked back toward the aisle entrance behind her. The 11 sign still hung there. The aisle now had 2 numbers. Paige swallowed hard and backed away, refusing the end with the 12 marker. She tried to retreat the way she'd come. The aisle behind her looked longer than before. The overhead lighting seemed to thin out, creating a tunnel of dimness. Her phone light trembled as she aimed it back. The cart line in the racetrack aisle was no longer visible. Paige blinked rapidly and stepped back toward the aisle entrance. When she reached it, she saw the carts again, still lined up, still blocking the racetrack path, but closer than they should have been. The barrier had moved deeper into the store. It now sat only a few feet from aisle 11's mouth, as if it had advanced while she wasn't looking. Paige's breath turned shallow. She backed into the aisle again, not wanting to stand in the open. The cart wheels clicked softly, not from the racetrack, from behind her, deeper in aisle 11. Paige turned. A flatbed restocking cart rolled into view from behind an end cap further down the aisle. It moved slowly, straight, as if guided by a steady hand. No hand was visible. The flatbed's bin was empty. On the bed lay a folded sheet of lined notebook paper, placed precisely in the center like before. The cart rolled closer, wheels clicking. Paige backed away until her spine touched the shelf. Bags of pet food rustled faintly. A detergent bottle label shone in her phone light, like a small, indifferent eye. The cart stopped 10 feet away. The folded paper sat there, waiting. Paige's mind screamed at her not to touch it, but the urge to know, pure survival curiosity, pushed against fear. If the paper held instructions, she needed them. If it held a warning, she needed that too. She took one cautious step forward, then another, and reached toward the paper with her phone light aimed directly at it. The paper unfolded on its own, not by wind. The folds opened in a controlled sequence, one corner lifting, then another, then the center spreading flat like a hand opening. Paige stumbled back, breath caught in her throat. The paper was no longer blank. A single line had appeared in thick black marker, as if written earlier and concealed by the folds. Clock out. Paige stared, nausea rising. Clock out meant the time clock terminal in receiving. Clock out meant walking back through the store, past the cart barrier, past the new 12 signs. It meant compliance. The cartwheels clicked once. The cart rolled forward an inch. Paige backed away, shaking her head, refusing without words. The overhead lights flickered, and then the announcement system crackled to life. A soft electronic pop, then the low buzz of a speaker waking from sleep. Paige froze. The intercom system should have been off after closing unless a manager used it. A voice came through the speakers. Not Curtis's voice, not any recorded corporate message. The sound was a rough, breathy imitation of speech, flattened, distorted, as if stitched together from broken audio. It didn't speak in a sentence. It made a single phrase, repeated twice. Aisle 12, aisle 12. Paige's skin went cold. The cart rolled again, 2 inches this time, pushing the paper forward like an offering. Paige spun and ran. She sprinted down aisle 11 toward the end farthest from the cart, choosing the unknown direction because the known one was blocked. She passed the detergent and paper towel stacks, reached the end cap, and swung left into what should have been seasonal, but seasonal wasn't there. The shelves on either side were different, taller, tighter, stacked with bulk cases that didn't belong on the floor. The lighting was dimmer, and the air smelled stronger of damp cardboard, like the receiving bay had spilled forward. Paige slowed abruptly, disoriented, phone light sweeping. A hanging marker swung above her. 12. Paige's breath stopped. The corridor ahead wasn't a store aisle anymore. It was a narrow passage flanked by tall metal racks like the ones in overflow storage. The ceiling grid was higher. The floor changed from tile to sealed concrete, scuffed and stained. Pallets sat stacked in shadow. There were no price tags, no end cap displays, no customer signage. This was the back of house space, but she had never opened a door to enter it. She was standing in it anyway, as if the store had peeled itself open and placed her where it wanted. Paige turned to run back. Behind her, where the store floor should have been, stood a line of carts, more than before, nested and angled into a wall-like barrier. Beyond the carts, the fluorescent-lit store aisles looked distant, muted, almost unreal, like a scene behind a window you couldn't reach. The intercom crackled again. Clock out. Paige's throat tightened. She backed away from the carts and moved deeper into the narrow passage because there was nowhere else to go. The racks on either side rose above her head, packed with boxes that formed blind corners and dark pockets. A cartwheel clicked somewhere behind her in the passage, slow and regular. Not in the store here. Paige's phone light trembled, catching glimpses of labels on boxes. Random shipments, seasonal overflow, discontinued stock. The kind of goods that waited back here until someone decided they mattered again. She moved forward cautiously, eyes scanning for an exit door, a fire door, anything. At the far end of the passage, a small kiosk stood against the wall. A time clock terminal. Paige approached it with dread. The screen glowed pale green in the dim. The terminal's keypad waited like a mouth with teeth. The screen displayed a prompt. Enter ID. Paige shook her head, backing away, refusing. The terminal beeped. The prompt refreshed on its own. Enter ID. A low sound came from behind her. Soft, steady, the scrape of wheels on concrete. Paige turned her phone light back down the passage. A flatbed cart sat at the far end, partially obscured by rack shadows. It wasn't moving fast. It rolled forward slowly, patient, as if it had all night. On its bed lay a punch card, not a modern badge, an old paper punch card yellowed at the edges like something from decades ago. Paige stared, throat tight. She hadn't seen punch cards in years. This store used badges, digital terminals, barcode IDs. The cart rolled closer. The punch card slid forward slightly on the bed as if nudged. Paige backed away until she was inches from the terminal. The screen beeped again. Enter ID. And then, beneath the prompt, new text appeared. Curtis complete. Paige's blood ran cold. Curtis complete. Clock out complete. Something had already processed him. Paige turned and sprinted past the terminal, deeper into the back area, refusing to remain where the screen demanded her name. She ran until she reached a metal door labeled Emergency Exit, grabbed the crash bar, and slammed into it. The door flew open. A siren erupted instantly. Piercing, high, relentless. Red strobe lights flashed, washing the racks and walls in urgent pulses. Paige stumbled into the outside service alley behind the building, cold air punching her lungs. She kept running, not caring about policy, not caring about termination, only caring about distance. The siren blared behind her, echoing against the building. She reached the corner of the supermarket and looked back toward the dock area. The roll-up dock door was open now, fully open, revealing darkness inside the bay like a throat. The parking lot lamps cast weak light across the asphalt. No person emerged, no figure chased. But at the edge of the open dock bay, under the overhead light that didn't flicker, a shopping cart sat perfectly centered, facing outward as if watching her leave. Paige ran to her car, hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped her keys. She got inside and locked the doors, then drove out of the lot without looking back. The next day, corporate wrote her up for triggering an alarm and leaving without clocking out. Curtis didn't return calls. He didn't show up for his next shift. The store's schedule listed him as terminated by the system at 12:27 a.m. Paige never went into that supermarket again. Logan liked the quiet of after-hours work until it stopped feeling like quiet. He was a contract sanitation worker, the kind called in once or twice a month to deep clean what daily crews didn't touch. The undersides of shelving, the drains near the produce misters, the narrow gaps behind freezers where grime collected in layers. Most people assumed supermarkets were always clean because they smelled like citrus cleaner and refrigeration. Logan knew better. A store could look spotless while hiding the kind of mess that only showed itself when the lights went low and the floor was empty. Tonight's job was supposed to be routine. Meet the closing manager, sign the clipboard, run the floor scrubber in the back aisles, pressure wash the receiving bay drains, and be out by 3 a.m. The pay was decent. The hours were brutal. Logan didn't complain because the work was steady. He arrived at 11:45 p.m. to a mostly empty lot. The store's neon sign glowed weakly. The front doors were locked, but an employee entrance on the side was propped for contractors. Inside, the store was dimmed to night lighting, half-bright aisles, shadowed corners. The air was colder than daytime, the refrigeration units dominating the atmosphere now that customers weren't bringing in warmth. A faint chemical smell hung everywhere, as if the building had been disinfected and sealed. A manager met him near the front. The manager looked exhausted, eyes red, movements quick and clipped. Logan didn't catch the name on the badge. He only noticed the manager's insistence on speed, the way the clipboard was shoved forward for signatures, the way the manager's gaze kept drifting toward the back hallway, as if expecting something to appear. Logan signed and rolled his equipment cart in, a metal janitorial cart with a mop bucket, hoses, a small pressure washer unit, and a stack of industrial towels. The manager handed him a key ring with 2 keys, one for the receiving bay cage, one for the chemical closet. The manager gestured toward the back and left immediately without waiting for Logan to respond, disappearing into the office as if the front of the store was a place he could hide. Logan didn't care. He preferred being left alone. He pushed his cart toward the back, past the darkened bakery, the silent deli counter, the produce section with its mist system turned off. The store felt larger without shoppers. Aisles stretched like corridors in a warehouse. The overhead speakers were silent. Even the music system was off, leaving only the steady mechanical hum of fans and compressors. Logan reached the receiving bay doors and pushed through into the back. Receiving smelled like wet cardboard and old vegetable pulp, normal for a dock area. A forklift sat idle. Pallets were stacked neatly. The roll-up door was down. The space was lit by harsh fluorescence that made everything look slightly sick. Logan wheeled his cart toward the drains along the wall and began setting up the pressure washer. He uncoiled the hose, connected it to the spigot, and tested the trigger. Water hissed, then stopped. He worked methodically, focusing on the job because method kept the mind from wandering in empty places. He sprayed degreaser near the drains, waited the required minutes, then blasted the grime free. Dirty water surged into the drains with a gurgling sound. That gurgle changed. It wasn't just water moving. It sounded thicker, as if something else traveled through the pipes beneath him. A slow gulping, then a pause, then another. Logan paused and listened, nozzle lowered. The gurgle repeated, timed like a pattern. He told himself it was air pressure in the line. Stores had complex plumbing. Drains burped. Pipes made odd noises. Then the metal door to the receiving bay's side corridor clicked. Logan turned his head. The corridor door, leading to the compactor area and the locked cage, had been shut when he arrived. Now it was open a few inches, revealing darkness beyond the fluorescent spill. Logan stared, expecting the manager to appear, maybe returning to check on him. No one came. Logan walked to the door and pushed it wider. The corridor was dim, lit only by an emergency light at the far end. The compactor area sat beyond, a dark bulk behind chain link. The air smelled sourer down there like old trash and spilled fruit. Logan saw something on the corridor floor, a line of wet footprints. Not boot prints, not tread marks from a pallet jack. Bare footprints. They were too long, too narrow, the toes splayed slightly. The wetness around them shone faintly in the emergency light, and the prints led from the compactor area toward the receiving bay, stopping just inside the threshold, as if whoever made them had stepped to the edge, paused, and then decided not to enter the bright space. Logan's stomach tightened. He looked back into receiving. His cart sat where he left it. The hose lay coiled. The fluorescence buzzed overhead. No one stood behind him. Logan backed out of the corridor and shut the door, forcing the latch to click. He told himself it was a prank by a store employee. He told himself it was a homeless person who'd slipped in earlier and washed their feet at a mop sink. He told himself anything that didn't require acknowledging how wrong the footprints looked. He returned to the drains and resumed the pressure wash. The water hissed. The grime broke free. The drain gurgled again, thicker this time, slower. Then the overhead speakers crackled. Logan froze, trigger released. The hiss stopped abruptly. A low tone came through the speakers, one sustained note, like a test signal. Then, in a flat, automated voice that sounded nothing like the store's normal announcements, a message played once. Clean up in aisle. The voice paused as if searching for the correct number. 0. Logan stared upward, skin prickling. There was no aisle 0. Aisles started at 1. Employees joked about aisle 13 because the store skipped it in numbering, but there was no aisle 0. The speakers clicked off. Silence returned, heavy. Logan looked toward the door leading back to the store floor. His mind wanted to leave the receiving bay, to return to a place that felt more public, more visible. But the job required him to finish here first, and contracts weren't forgiving. He moved his cart toward the door. His cart's wheels squeaked once. A second squeak answered from the corridor he'd just closed. Logan stopped. He listened. Another squeak came, closer this time, like the wheel of a cart rolling softly over concrete. Logan's throat tightened. He pushed his cart faster toward the store floor doors, wanting open aisles and sight lines. The receiving bay lights flickered once, then steadied, and from the corridor, the sound of bare, wet footsteps began. Slow, sticky, deliberate, moving toward the receiving door with no hurry at all. The wet footsteps didn't hurry. They moved with the slow confidence of something that had all the time the building could hold, each step making a sticky sound against concrete, as if the soles were freshly soaked and heavy with residue. Logan stood still beside his cart. Pressure washer hose looped like a sleeping snake at his feet, and listened to the sound approach the receiving bay door he'd just latched. The footsteps stopped on the other side. No rattle of the handle, no shove, no scrape of a shoulder testing the frame, just a pause long enough to make Logan's pulse climb into his throat. The silence felt deliberate, like a tension. Logan backed away from the receiving corridor door and pivoted toward the double doors that led back to the store floor. He wanted wide aisles and overhead cameras and distance from the compactor hall. He pushed his cart fast, the wheels squealing louder now, echoing off metal shelving and pallet stacks. The receiving fluorescence buzzed overhead with a faint stutter. A few seconds of that stutter was all it took to make the space feel unstable, like light itself could be negotiated. He reached the double doors and shoved through. The store floor was dim and empty, nightlights casting pale bands across tile. Bakery sat dark. Deli screens were off. The produce misters were silent. leaving the greens dull instead of freshly wet. The store's cold air felt cleaner out here, but the hum of refrigeration was stronger. Dozens of compressors and fans creating a low vibration that traveled up through his shoes. Logan steered his cart toward the front, aiming for the office area, because offices had phones and people, and the kind of locked doors that usually obeyed keys. He kept his head up, scanning down aisles. Shadows clung beneath shelf edges. End cap displays looked too still, too neat. He had just passed the aisle with spices when his cart's wheels hit something on the floor and jolted hard enough to rattle the mop bucket. Logan looked down. A pale strip of paper lay across the tile, crumpled at one end like it had been dragged. Not a receipt, not a price label. It was longer, thicker, the kind of tape used to bundle boxes or seal pallets. Packing tape, but unrolled and laid flat. His cartwheel had rolled over it and pulled part of it forward. The tape clung briefly, then snapped loose and slapped the floor again. Logan crouched, fingers hovering. The tape's surface was wet, not with water, with something thin and slick that reflected the overhead lights in a faint sheen. Logan's stomach tightened. He straightened quickly and moved on, refusing to touch it. He pushed the cart faster. The front registers appeared ahead, dark lanes lined up like empty mouths. The customer service desk sat under a dim lamp. Beyond it, the office door was visible. Tinted window frames scuffed from years of keys and badges. Logan reached it and tried the handle. Locked. He pulled again, harder. Locked. Solid. Unyielding. The manager had taken the keyring earlier. The manager had gone into the office and shut the world out. Logan suddenly understood the exhausted look, the hurried handoff, the insistence on speed. It hadn't been impatience. It had been avoidance. Logan stepped back from the office door and looked around the front of the store for any other exit. The main sliding doors at the entrance were secured with a metal gate pulled down from above, leaving a narrow gap at the bottom like a throat not fully closed. The alarm panel beside the doors glowed faintly, but the display seemed dimmer than it should. The store was in a half state, closed, but not fully armed, like the building hadn't decided what it wanted to be. Logan moved to the customer service desk and reached for the store phone. The phone screen blinked once and went dark. He lifted the receiver anyway. Dead tone. The dead tone wasn't static. It was a flat, lifeless sound, the audio equivalent of a locked gate. Logan set the receiver down gently, as if noise might make something notice him faster. A sound came from behind him, not a footstep, a squeak of rubber. Logan turned. One of the register conveyor belts was moving, not fast, not loud. A slow crawl, the black belt inching forward as if trying to deliver something to the scanner that had no cashier. The belt carried nothing. It moved anyway, and the sound it made, rubber sliding on rollers, was soft and constant, like a whisper that refused to stop. Logan backed away, eyes darting. He reached into his cart and grabbed the only thing that felt remotely like control, a metal squeegee handle, long and heavy enough to be used as a club if he had to. It was a ridiculous weapon in a supermarket, but it gave his hands something to do besides shake. The overhead speakers popped. The sound was small, but in the empty building it hit like a pin dropped in a silent room. A low buzz followed, then the same flat automated voice as earlier returned, clearer now, closer to the ear despite coming from the ceiling. Clean up in aisle 0. The phrase played once, then again. Then the speakers clicked off. Logan stood rigid, staring down the main racetrack aisle that looped around the store. The words kept repeating in his head because they didn't belong. Aisle 0. Not a thing. A faint, sticky footstep sounded far behind him, somewhere between the back aisles and receiving. It wasn't sprinting, it was coming. Logan made a decision that felt less like choice and more like survival math. He wasn't going to wait for whatever was in the back to reach the front. He needed an exit that didn't depend on the office door or the locked main entrance. Supermarkets had emergency exits. Fire doors along the perimeter. He'd seen them. Red signs above metal doors in the far corners of the building. They were alarmed, but alarms meant noise and noise meant attention from outside, which meant the building would have to share its secret with the world. Logan grabbed his cart and ran it down the racetrack aisle, wheels clattering on tile. He passed frozen food, then dairy. The refrigeration hum deepened near the coolers, thick enough to be felt in his teeth. The air grew colder, as if the building was trying to preserve something. He spotted an emergency exit door at the far end, near the back corner. A red exit sign glowed above it. Logan veered toward it and slammed the crash bar. The door didn't open. It didn't resist like a normal locked door. It resisted like the frame had no hinge function anymore. Logan shoved again, putting his shoulder into it. Nothing. He stepped back, breath ragged, and stared at the door's seams. The alarm box above it blinked once, then went steady, as if the system had acknowledged his attempt and dismissed it. Logan turned and ran toward the other side of the store, toward the next emergency exit. His footsteps echoed across tile. The store's night lighting seemed dimmer in the aisles he crossed, as if the light had decided to retreat from him. He passed end caps that looked different than he remembered, stacked too high, arranged too tight, leaving narrow lanes that made the store feel less like a retail space and more like a maze. He reached the second emergency exit near the bakery side and hit the crash bar. Nothing. His breath came in fast pulls. His hands tightened on the squeegee handle until the metal bit his palm. A wet footstep sounded again, louder now, nearer than before, and it wasn't on the tile. Then it sounded like it came from deeper, from somewhere that wasn't the store floor. Like the sound traveled through the building itself, through ducts and drains, surfacing wherever it wanted. Logan backed away from the dead emergency exit and looked around, forcing his eyes to read the environment like a map. Signs overhead, departments, staff-only doors. There, near the dairy coolers, was a plain door with a small keypad, a utility room entrance, janitorial closet, something like that. Logan pushed his cart toward it. He didn't remember seeing it earlier, but the store had corners that hid things when you weren't looking for them. He reached the door and tried the handle. It opened. The room beyond was narrow, lit by a single bulb that flickered faintly. It smelled of bleach, rubber gloves, and a dampness that didn't match the store's cold dryness. A mop sink sat in the corner. Shelves held chemicals in labeled jugs. A metal floor grate sat near the sink, dark with moisture. Logan stepped inside and shut the door behind him, sliding the bolt lock across with a hard metallic clack. The sound felt like a prayer. He listened. Outside, the store hum continued. No footsteps approached immediately. The quiet inside the closet felt thin. Logan's eyes adjusted and caught something on the far wall behind the shelves. A second door, not a closet door. A heavier one, industrial, with paint flaking around the edges. It had no window. It had a simple handle and a sign taped to it with peeling corners. The sign read ISIL 0. Logan stared. His throat tightened. There was no reason for a door inside a chemical closet to be labeled like that. It wasn't customer-facing. It wasn't part of merchandising. It looked like a label meant only for staff who wanted to pretend the label was normal. The floor grate near the sink made a slow gurgle. Logan glanced down at it, and the gurgle deepened, as if pressure moved through the pipes beneath the metal. The damp smell strengthened. The sound wasn't just water, it was movement. Outside the closet door, something scraped softly against tile. Logan held his breath. The scrape moved along the door, not at handle level but low, near the bottom seam, like a wet foot dragging, like something moving close to the floor. Logan tightened his grip on the squeegee handle and backed toward the ISIL 0 door, heart hammering. He didn't want to open it. He didn't want to discover what it led to, but the main store had become a locked box. The exits didn't work. The office was sealed, and something was on the other side of the closet door, close enough that its presence turned the air sour. The scrape outside paused. Then a soft, sticky footstep landed directly in front of the closet door. Logan's stomach dropped. He waited for the handle to turn. It didn't. Instead, the dead store phone's ringtone sounded faintly through the wall. Not loud enough to locate, not loud enough to follow, just enough to prove the building could create any sound it wanted wherever it wanted. Logan made the choice. He grabbed the ISIL 0 door handle and pulled. The door swung open with a smoothness that didn't match its weight, as if the hinges had been oiled recently. Cold air poured out, colder than the dairy section, colder than the freezers. The air smelled like wet concrete and rust and something faintly organic, like a basement that had been closed for too long. Beyond the doorway was a narrow corridor with concrete walls and low overhead piping. Utility lights ran along the ceiling in a line, each bulb creating a small pool of harsh light and long stretches of shadow between. The corridor sloped downward slightly, as if leading beneath the store. Logan stepped through and shut the door behind him. The latch clicked. The sound echoed in the corridor like a coin dropped into a well. He turned and moved forward, feet careful on the concrete. The corridor walls were damp in places, streaked with old mineral stains. The floor was slick in patches. A faint trickle of water moved somewhere unseen. As he walked, the utility lights ahead seemed to switch on a fraction before he reached them, as if reacting to his approach. The pools of light felt like checkpoints. After a dozen yards, the corridor opened into a wider space. Logan stopped. The room looked like a service basement, but it was organized wrong. Instead of pipes and electrical panels only, there were shelves, retail shelves, lined with products like a supermarket aisle. Canned goods, boxes, bottled cleaners. Everything faced forward in neat rows as if expecting customers. An aisle marker hung from the ceiling in the center of the room, laminated and crisp. Logan's breath caught. This wasn't a utility space anymore. It was a copy of the store, but stripped down to essentials, colder, darker, and too quiet. The shelves were taller than usual, squeezing the aisle into a narrow lane. The lights hummed with a sharper pitch. The air smelled damp and sour. Logan moved forward slowly, scanning for another door, another exit. At the far end of the aisle, a metal security gate stood pulled halfway down, like the main entrance gate upstairs, blocking a doorway that led into deeper darkness. A faint movement occurred near the bottom of the gate. Logan froze. Something slid across the floor on the other side, just visible beneath the gate's lower edge. Not fast, not slow. A smooth glide like wet skin on concrete. Logan backed away, pulse banging, and turned to retreat the way he came. Behind him, the ISIL 0 door was gone. Not the doorway. The entire wall section where the door had been was now stacked with product shelves, sealed off as if it had never been an exit at all. Boxes of paper towels sat where the door should have been. A tower of canned soup blocked where the frame should have existed. Logan's throat tightened. He stepped closer, reaching out. His fingers met cardboard and cold metal shelving. Solid, real. The building had moved the door, or it had moved him. A soft, sticky footstep sounded at the far end of the aisle behind the half-lowered gate. The sound was inside the room now, no longer distant through walls. It approached with no hurry. Logan backed down the aisle, eyes darting for anything that could function as a breakpoint, an emergency ladder, a vent, a service hatch. He spotted a metal stairwell sign on the wall between shelves, a small arrow pointing upward with words stenciled beneath. To floor. Logan lunged toward it. A narrow door sat beneath the sign, industrial and plain, with a push bar. He hit it hard. It opened. Warm air hit his face, warmer than the basement cold, carrying the familiar supermarket smell of plastic, cleaner, and refrigeration. Logan stumbled through and slammed it shut behind him, hands shaking as he slid the bolt. He was back on the store floor, not in dairy, not near the chemical closet. He stood in a narrow passage behind the bakery ovens, a staff-only area lined with racks of bread trays. A metal door ahead led out into the main bakery department. The overhead lights here were brighter than the night setting, as if the area had been intentionally lit. Logan didn't pause to understand. He sprinted through the bakery door into the store proper, running toward the front entrance gate. The store's main racetrack looked unchanged again. Dim aisles, silent registers, dark office. But the front gate was different. It was up. The metal security gate that had been pulled down earlier was now fully raised, leaving the sliding doors unobstructed. The doors were still shut, but the motion sensors should trigger them if the system still behaved normally. Logan ran to the doors. They slid open. Cold night air flooded in, and the empty parking lot opened wide like a release. Logan ran out, nearly slipping on the mat, and didn't stop until he reached his van. He fumbled the keys so badly he dropped them twice. When he finally started the engine, the dashboard clock read 12:58 a.m. He stared at the time, breath ragged. That wasn't possible. He'd been in the store longer than that. He'd set up equipment. He'd cleaned drains. He'd walked across the entire building. He'd gone down into whatever that basement aisle was. Logan drove anyway. He didn't slow until he reached a well-lit road with other vehicles. The next day, the contract company called him repeatedly. He didn't answer at first. When he finally did, he learned the store manager had filed a complaint. Logan had left equipment behind and triggered no alarms, but vanished before the job was complete. The manager claimed he'd never shown up at all. The sign-in sheet Logan remembered didn't list his name. The keyring he'd been handed was still hanging on its hook in the office, untouched. Logan drove back in daylight with a co-worker to retrieve his equipment. The store looked normal. The employee entrance was open. The receiving bay smelled like cardboard and nothing else. The corridor door to the compactor was shut, dry floor beneath it, no wet footprints. The chemical closet door was ordinary, one door only, no ISIL 0 sign, no second entrance. But when Logan wheeled his cart out, he noticed something stuck under one of the cart's wheels, pressed flat like it had been rolled over and forgotten. A thin strip of paper, not a receipt from a register, a narrow label, like the kind printed for shelves. It read, "Clean up complete, ISIL 0."